2023 and 2024 have been pivotal for Creative Assembly, a now 37-year-old company. And if you were to sum up their 2023 in one word, it would be disaster. It was the worst of it. They were a company seemingly blind to criticism that were taking players for granted. They were constantly ratcheting up their monetization whilst decreasing the value proposition of their DLCs. People were leaking from the company like hell. I was even getting leaks as somebody who doesn't specifically do Warhammer coverage. Coverage on the internet exploded. But today, a trip to Warhammer 3 in Steam does paint a little bit of a different picture, and we've even seen a project be greenlit in the wake of SEGA gutting their European operations that maybe says a little bit of nature's healing. But first, the context. It really is hard to overstate how screwed they were. So first up, SEGA cancelled Hyenas. Hyenas was their immediately mocked extraction shooter that allegedly had hellish development, which was apparently the norm for their console division. But as that was happening, Warhammer was going through a complete crisis of its own. And for them, that was really bad. Warhammer was pretty much the pillar of their business. Warhammer 3 had a messy launch, and honestly, that's putting it lightly. The DLC strategy they rolled with then burned their fans. And then Total War Pharaoh happened. If you thought that shrinkflation was going on, it is the game that would prove it to you. It was a smaller saga game in scope, which would be like the middlingly received Thrones of Britannia and the literally given away for free in the Epic Store Total War Troy. But it was priced like a full historical Total War game. Now, I come from the historical side of the Total War player base, and to say that we have felt ignored for a very long time and underserved would be putting it mildly. So seeing that absolutely did not go down well. Reporting sourced from insiders painted a picture of management running the studio into the ground, with team members who had an accurate read in the situation being routinely ignored and passed over. It was a disaster. And it all came to a head just over 1 year from the publication of this very video. December 17th, 2023. A statement from leadership, and the rub of that statement was clear. Basically, they said they're not reacting to things swiftly enough, their development pace is not working for players, they mispriced Pharaoh, which actually had its price lowered, with all customers being refunded the difference. Then Total War 3's DLC was delayed, there was promises of fixes made, and that was it. They had made their big claim. And what we're going to do today is chart forth 2024 to see if they proved their worth. But we're also going to go deep into SEGA to see what they have said, how they've been divesting from Europe, and the sort of curious situation we're in for the future. Now, of course, we are about to enter an absolute desert of content because it is the holidays, but I do have good news for you. We've got videos queued up for all of that time. So all I ask is that you give us a click on the subscription button. Basically, it gives the algorithm a positive signal, and that actually helps us out a hell of a lot. The future will make it through with the support of today's sponsor. I'm going to tackle Total War Pharaoh first, because it's a little surprising as a story. It's also over. The very final update launched July 25th, 2024. It was called Dynasties. Creative Assembly Sophia basically added much of the Total War Troy content to it, but they reworked it to fit Pharaoh. And as an overall piece of content, Dynasties really is quite substantial. You get double the world map, many more factions, and it was basically a large-scale Bronze Age Total War game, at least in the sort of location that the Bronze Age is typically thought about the most, but I'll kill a historical tangent. Anyway, this also came with a new Steam page. It actually turns out it was a full new client. It was separate to the base Pharaoh client, and that meant that mods and saves would not transfer over. Hopping over to Steam, we can see the base game's recent and overall reviews are still mixed. 64%, 3,268 reviews in total, and just 44 recent, but that's because Dynasties exists. It released in July, it's got 2,689 reviews, 84% positive, which is radically better, and 259 of those reviews are actually recent. Now, that is by no means a large game and a massive success. I think it's going to be a long time until they see ROI in this, but looking at player numbers, we are routinely getting between 600 and 1,200. That is actually people playing that game and presumably having fun because they've left an 84% rating. Kind of makes sense. I mean, there is quite a lot of content in that now, especially if you didn't wear yourself out in Troy. And I think why it's relevant is because most companies faced with this situation would just cut and run. Whereas here, from a business sense, at least this will live in their back catalog, it will get some sales, but perhaps more importantly, they live in a world where Warhammer 3 fans are worried, and if they see that another game in the Total War lineup has basically been abandoned amid staff cuts, Hyenas going under, that would shake confidence, and that shaken confidence would hurt Warhammer 3. Now, of course, we gotta talk about Warhammer 3. Okay, numbers. August 2023 saw Shadows of Change release. They sure were Shadows of Change. It was a disaster. That's the DLC that started the player revolt in earnest. Not that people were happy because, well, the Realms of Chaos campaign kind of blows, the game ship full of bugs, and so many other problems. Now, at that time, it had player counts of around 34k, but by April 2024, the numbers changed. Thrones of Decay, which came out then, saw concurrency soar to 74k, and it's also where they changed the business model. So the overall higher price would stay, but you could purchase every constituent faction separately, or you could just buy the entire bundle for a discounted price. It wasn't just paid stuff. CA did make guarantees. They promised larger updates outside of paid DLC, and what we got there was the likes of, say, reworks to the Dwarves Deep, to Chaos Cults, whole units actually added to some factions, and some pretty damn solid quality of life fixes, but there have been wobbles, including recent wobbles actually. And it's kind of unfortunate for them. If you take a look at the latest round of DLC, you would assume it would be the cherry on top of a very hard-fought year. But on Steam, each constituent DLC has got a mixed response. These are the DLCs that just came out, though for the most part, those are down to bugs and mechanical critiques from the more dedicated players, which, to be clear, is a bad thing, but it's not them fundamentally rug-pulling on the value proposition, but still, they need to navigate it with care. I did see some negative reviews also not realize that the Steam dynamic bundle pricing wouldn't overcharge you if you bought them separate but then continued buying them, but that basically comes with the territory when you do your DLC like that in Steam. Now, the player numbers have actually lowered. Thrones' peak was one of those genuine we are so back moments. Its contrast from Shadows of Change was massive. Omens of Destruction is sitting at 48k, which is weaker, but it's well ahead of Shadows of Change. Big picture though, the one thing that will matter to them the most has changed. It's actually quite stark. 2023 saw them add 12,000 positive reviews, but also add 20,000 negative reviews. Quite bad. 2024 is night and day. They added 25,000 positive reviews, but they actually decreased 5,000 negative reviews. And that is an impressive thing, because that means that somebody who left a negative review has actually got to go onto Steam, go to their review, and flip that to positive. A lot of people say they do that, but common wisdom around game developers is that it's very rare to get someone to flip their review. Not out of badness, just because it's another digital chore and we've all got so many digital chores. Overall then, it is still sitting at 70%, which is, lower than we would like. But the recent reviews are 89%. That is really good. And it's actually not all that has changed. Creative Assembly have also changed player communication and, they really needed to, because before it absolutely blew. And industry-wide, it's communication that is getting live teams in the most hot water. This is absolutely what we want marketing teams to get through their thick skulls. Funny enough, we actually like it when developers talk to us like they're people and we're people, rather than it being clear PR where it almost feels like the devs have just got a gun to their head, or those awful, overproduced, staged conversations between executives that are always cinematically shot that, are deeply embarrassing. What CA did was definitely risk the latter, because they did have plenty of long videos that were panels, but they actually did a good enough job of not going too much in the production value and just letting their developers take center stage. And I think it's hard to overstate the power of just putting a human face to some news or to a mechanic, and importantly, to do it in the right way. Because Creative Assembly got that deeply wrong, and they got it wrong with a guy called Julian McKinley, who also shared his story when all of this shit was going on. Basically, Julian was held up as the face of Rome 2's shit show of a launch, especially problems related to AI. I was there when that game came out. Oh boy, the AI was really, really bad, and coming off Shogun 2, which was, at least pretty damn refined for what it was a big step back and a major disappointment. The thing is, Julian was basically the guy that everybody knew for Rome 2. He got a massive amount of flack, and he was not supported or even set up to win. It was a massive loss, and it was them treating him properly badly. As for now, and again, as somebody who's basically a lifelong fan of this genre, fans sometimes, kind of pissed off a lot of other times, I do think their communication is way better. It is more humanized. It does make me feel like I've got a better connection to those developers and that I'm more willing to listen. That is a big win. And so far in this video, it does seem like a pretty damn strong scorecard for the company. But of course, you know us, we do have to go a little bit extra in things. So to get a handle on everything, we decided to focus on who's actually running the show, and that is their corporate owner, SEGA, and the lovely cuts they've been doing. November 2024 saw Sega make what is by now a fairly common move. They sold Amplitude Studios back to its management. Now, you may not have heard the name Amplitude, but if you've seen the Endless series of games, it's basically that dev. But let's hope that their fate is not as dire as their last sale, which was Relic. And when I say Relic, yeah, that's Relic, the one who has made many real-time strategies, and of course, had their hand in Space Marine 1 quite a long time ago. Before Sega sold Relic, they actually laid off 121 people, but then shortly after Relic went independent, they had to lay off another 41 people, with leadership basically saying they needed to reduce their costs in order to survive. Pretty damn brutal stuff. Now, this Amplitude sale was framed by Sega as, quote, concluding the structural reforms that have been taking place in Sega's European business, which basically translates to, we're getting the hell out of Europe as much as we can and we are cutting those costs down. Being part of Sega EU was absolutely not a good time. It did lead to at least some of the issues that CA faced, and where it's made quite clear is this recently filed financial report. Now, it was filed recently, but it does detail up to April 2024. Going through it, though, it is notable how little focus the European division of the company has. You've got Total War 3 making the cut, but barely, while the rest is Sonic, Persona, Like a Dragon, and of course, Pachinko, which we all love putting our endless money into. Total War's logo is there, mentioned alongside Football Manager, but there's no sales milestones. There's no big release. There's no good news. It's basically barely mentioned. And the document does not have nice things to say about the European operations as well. They say this: we prioritized autonomy of the studios in the European region too highly. Yeah, ouch. And in the document, Sega claims that this led to dropping profitability, leading to layoffs, studio sales, projects in the medium term being cancelled, and a re-evaluation of the asset value of titles, which in other words basically just means a lot of cuts. And not just development and staffing. Another thing has changed. Publishing functions were taken away from each of the European studios, now being made separate from their dev teams. And so if you were to wrap it all up in layman's terms, basically Sega said that they let their European studios just do what they needed to. Sega would greenlight stuff, send along the money, and everything would be fine. But then, of course, the costs soared and profitability ran away. And this thing's quite interesting. Teamer222 found some LinkedIn budget leaks, and they put a lot into perspective. On that, we can see Rome 2 having a budget of £30 million across 200 people. Shogun 2 cost a mere 15 million, right? Which is barely any compared to most modern games, and you see similar for other projects like Total War Attila. Post-pandemic, though, European cost of living has soared. The economics have weakened. There was a period of a hell of a lot of competition within the game sector that just drove wages up, and, well, both Total War and Company of Heroes also, as franchises, happened to struggle when all of that was going on. We then add to this the absolute money pit that was Hyenas, and you can see why Sega looked at all of this and thought, God damn it, we want out. I mean, normally in a video like this, whenever we're talking about what the big corporate office is doing, the framing is that they're being really, evil and mean. And obviously it's hard to make a call there because there are so many details that as members of the public, without robust leaking, we just don't exactly have. But you look at the performance of some of these companies, yeah, times were rough. Hyenas, what the hell was that? Why the hell did Sega even greenlight that thing? All pretty damn strange. And for Sega, well, they just had to take a look at Atlas and RGG. The infinite Like a Dragon games. Persona always selling amazingly. And I know they say comparison is the thief of joy, but good God, when you're making that comparison, no wonder Sega grabbed their axe and just started swinging wildly in the direction of Europe. And of course, as a publicly traded company, they had to be seen to be pruning what was no longer performing well. Now that is actually the worry today. The external state of the Total War franchise has undoubtedly improved. They did the right thing with Dynasties, and we can see 89% recent positive reviews for Warhammer 3. But with Sega doing everything they're doing, what about the internal state of the studio behind it? It has been hard to work out what they're doing next. Officially, Creative Assembly marked their 37th birthday. They confirmed that historical and fantasy projects are in the works for Total War, but also that they had an unannounced project. And that really was interesting. There were various leaks suggesting a World War I game being in development at some point, a Star Wars title, and of course, Warhammer 40k. Turns out that that project anyway was none of them. It was Alien Isolation 2 being made under returning original director Al Hope. which really is quite the turnaround from Hyenas from their console team. And it's quite interesting. It turns out that Alien Romulus, a movie which I do have to say I really did love, it was inspired by Alien Isolation. And if you think about who will remain from Hyenas, well, I mean, come on, Hyenas. They worked on a hell of a lot of space stations, and plenty of those people will have worked on Alien Isolation 1. And to me, this is one of those things that almost says, could nature be healing in some way? Because what this game is a single-player, narrative horror game that is being made in place of a live service extraction shooter. So, in a way, you could say it would never make infinite money. Infinite wealth, if we're to think about the output of RGG. But of course, with the right expectations, with a sane budget, it can do well. And that is what brings me to a chart that we dug up for another video. So this is a breakdown of player count distribution from one of just the game industry's most experienced analysts. You can see 75% of player concurrency is captured by just 5 games. So to survive and actually make the shitload of money that they would want, Hyenas would need to, as a live service title, take a big chunk of that top mindshare. That's going to be extremely hard to do at the best of times, even more so when you're fighting like all of the other video games on Earth, and also Bungie's Marathon, which is doing something similar. And we need only look at the last few years to see how many companies have broken their back trying to chase the live service dream. So what we see here then appears to be, and this is shocking, but a reasonable game that has a creative reason to exist that doesn't seem completely doomed to fail. That's a bit weird to see in 2024, but there it is. As for the Total War franchise, we'll need to wait and see. There have been leaks to so many creators that I don't think anyone's been lying, but leaks are only accurate as of how up-to-date the information the source has, which won't always be up-to-date. I suppose I'll leave it at this. The second they press the Warhammer 40k Total War button, they'll have infinite money, and I have to imagine SEGA will be pretty okay with that given how Warhammer 40k has just kind of turned into the biggest thing ever. So, that's the story there. That is, on balance, a pretty good 2024 that at the very least with Isolation has got a happy ending. Not all stories do, and for a spicy one, what's this next?